Hi, and welcome to Mindful, Beautiful, and Thriving, a podcast series by Tharaka Foundation focused on youth mental health. Before we begin today's episode, I just wanted to let you all know that all content that is found in our podcast is created for informational purposes only. This content is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, treatment, or therapy. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition, and never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard in this podcast. Thank you so much, and without further ado, let's get started.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Mindful, Beautiful, and Thriving. Today, we have an incredible guest, Dr. Rick Hanson. He's a neuropsychologist and a New York Times best-selling author of 7 books, including Resilient and my favorite one, Just One Thing, which gives simple steps to incorporate in our lives to change our belief system and be ourselves. He's an expert on positive neuroplasticity, overcoming social anxiety, and so much more. Before we continue, Dr. Hanson, could you please introduce yourself?
Oh, it's an honor to be here. As I was sharing just before we started, um, it is especially important to me to be able to reach young people. I have very acute and often painful memories of being a teenager myself. And if I could be of any help to anyone in that age group, I'm really, really happy about that. So thank you.
Yeah, that's great. So this is the time of the year during when there's many holidays and lots of family and friends gatherings. Since you walked this path, I want to explore the topic of social anxiety. One in 12 people experience SAD, social anxiety disorder, and which is the feeling that we always need to be validated and included. We'll discuss how it arrives, its symptoms, and how we can transform this anxiety into our power of communication, especially for youth. Before diving deeper, could you please define social anxiety and when people might feel it?
Sure. Well, we are profoundly social primates, pure and simple. So it's natural in a species that spent 290,000 of the last 300,000 years as anatomically modern humans, we spent in small bands of around 40 people. Just imagine that 40 people, 20, 15 kids, 25 adults living together most of your life. And so, of course, then it became really important to compare yourself to others and to worry about what people thought about you because it was a matter of raw survival. So it's completely normal to be eager to feel cared about, to feel that you're valued, you're appreciated, you're included. These are normal desires. There's nothing pathological about them. And it's completely normal as well to react to feelings of rejection or exclusion or shaming or being lower tier, lower status, or to discover suddenly that people you thought you could count on, like your friends, are, talking smack about you behind your back. Whoa, that's all completely normal. What fulfills the criteria for technically social anxiety disorder is marked feelings of inadequacy, embarrassment, and anxiety related to relationships with other people. Now, I experienced social anxiety disorder. I would have fulfilled the criteria as a adolescent, and the question then becomes, of course, what to do about it. So it's natural. It's natural to have passing feelings in which you get hurt or you want people to like you. That's totally normal. If you get extremely preoccupied by it and it limits you because you muzzle yourself or you bottle yourself up rather than expose yourself to risks of rejection, or if sometimes you glom onto one person or a small group of people that help you feel secure but are not really good for you. That also would be an example of some of the problems, really, in being socially anxious.
Yeah, I liked the thing where you said even in the old days were always comparing that if this group of tribe doesn't like us, we're kicked out, our life's over.
Yeah.
And I like that you said that some people might try think that they're still safe if they're with people, but they're actually just toxic people. So
Yep.
I liked that comparison too.
Yeah.
So I've heard that it's a feeling of being judged, overthinking, like feeling that you are unworthy of care and you're unconfident. So I want to learn more about your experience with this and what led you to research the topic before we work on more what it is and how we can overcome it.
Okay, great. So, for one, we start with our basic temperament. And my own temperament was to be shy. And so, people who are naturally shy are more prone to social anxiety that's significant. And so then my parents were loving and decent, bless their memory, but they were not very good at empathy. So I did not get the feeling that we all need, or I did not get it really strongly, that they understood the real me and liked the real me. I felt from them, kind of especially my mom, that I needed to perform. I needed to put on a mask of performance to ever be good enough. And that then put a lot of pressure on me. So I didn't get a lot of empathy. And then the third thing that happened, and this is how clinicians think, and this is how people can think, as they go through this about a friend or themselves, what are the risk factors that gradually add up? It's not usually just one thing. It's typically several things, such as, hypothetically, having an underlying sense of being less than other people, but you're kind of doing okay. And then suddenly some alpha kid in your school then really puts you down and shames you in public. And it's a devastating event that lands on a deep vulnerability. So it's often the combination of things. So to finish then, the third factor for me was I have a very late birthday and I skipped a grade. So I was 6 years old when I started third grade. I was 16 when I started college. I was very young going through school, 12 when I started high school. And that led me, combined with feeling socially awkward and shy, led to many, many experiences of feeling like an outsider. Not so much bullied, but threatened there. But mostly I just felt scared. And I just felt I had to keep my head down and not be noticed. And yet I really longed to be with other people. It felt like I was watching happy people having fun together through the wall, through the window of a restaurant. They were inside where it was warm. I was outside where it was cold and freezing. And I desperately wanted to go inside, but I was also afraid of what would happen if I stuck my neck out and asked someone to, be my friend. So that's how it was until I landed in college, which gave a transition for me. I went to UCLA. And somehow, here's the scoop. Even though I landed in college with what felt like a big hole in my heart, a big empty place, with a lot of hurt feelings around it, I had not received enough of the social supplies, we call them, that a typical person needs, even an introvert like me. We can be really affected both by the absence of the good as well as by the presence of the bad. Okay. So a lot of people who have not been overtly bullied or traumatized or mistreated in various ways can still be walking around with a deeply felt sense of unmet needs in the core of their being. So that's how I landed in college. And then, ta-da, I began to discover what would gradually fill that hole in my heart. And that was to look for natural, usually brief, usually mild opportunities to experience what had been missing previously for me. So to experience that at UCLA in the elevator as a heterosexual guy, a girl would smile at me. Oh my gosh, how could that happen? Or some people on my dorm floor would say, "Oh, Hanson, come on over here. We're having lunch." Whoa. Or I played intramural football a little bit, and we had this wonderful quarterback, much better athlete than me, who said once to me gruffly, "Hanson, you're good. I'm going to throw to you more." Stuff like that. That was $1 million moment. But most of them were little moments, but bit by bit, drop by drop, a breath at a time, literally, just a few seconds at a time, I would slow down to notice the good fact. Someone was genuinely inclusive or caring or friendly or nice or appreciative, something. Second, I felt it. I didn't just notice it. I helped myself feel it. A normal feeling of being, whoa, liked or seen, or whoa, wanted, whoa, wow. Feel it. And then, especially important, I slowed down. And 20, 30 years later, I learned as a neuropsychologist what I'd been doing in my brain. I slowed down to enable my brain to hardwire that experience into my body, into my nervous system, so that increasingly I began to feel liked and cared about and worthy and included and even loved. All right. So that's been kind of my story. And then I turned that actually into a career in positive neuropsychology. And like a lot of people in my profession, shared with other people some of what I had learned myself along the way.
Yeah, I like the three steps you said that you first notice the good act that someone did, then you slow down and you feel it, and then you slow down and enable the hardware and say that this is the feeling I like.
Yep. Now, if I could build on that, it's really interesting that when we're socially anxious, we often understandably feel like we are not receiving enough from the world. Okay. We're not being invited enough. We're not, people aren't being warm. And in fact, maybe what we're receiving from the world is a certain amount of crud, not just the absence of the good, but the presence of the bad coming our way, most of which we do not have control over. And to drop in another factor, sometimes bias, uh, social class, sexism, bodyism, blah, 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 all these various forms of bias, we're pack animals. And one ways that the group defines itself is by picking on outsiders, not like me, right? So for all kinds of reasons, there can be the presence of the bad as well as the absence of the good. Okay, what do we do then? Long term, we could talk about it. There are practical things to do to change your environment, to change what's around you, to change the world you're in. Choose better friends, uh, improve your social skills, join clubs, do activities, get out there more, take a big breath, make yourself ask someone to go to a party with you. There are things to do out in the world, but those are pretty hard. Those are pretty scary, and they can take a while to do. Meanwhile, if you feel yourself warm hearted and caring and friendly, that also is a good fact. If you are simply being supportive, emotionally available, and interested and friendly, which is relatively easy to do, it's relatively low risk, it's not a high bar to be that way, when that flows through you, it's a fact, and it will help you feel better. The point is, we have very little control about how the world treats us. We have a lot of control about how we treat the world. And warm-heartedness and other pro-social qualities flowing through us strengthen us and nurture us as they flow on through. And it's wonderful to realize that we have that power. We have that power to turn up the volume in what we're transmitting, even if what we're receiving from the world kind of sucks.
Yeah, I liked how you gave the scenario if there's not many good things happening around you, you can still yourself feel good and focus on how you treat the world rather than how the world treats you. So I
Yeah,
really liked that.
that's great. It was a stunner for me personally because I, of course, was very shy around girls, right? And I was young. I was younger than most of them in my grade. And what I gradually learned was that if I learned how to be a good listener and to be genuinely interested and to kind of look past the surface of what the other person was saying and not be pulling for reassurance myself, not be pulling for affection or approval. I wasn't asking for anything. I was just there to give my attention, to give my interest, to give my support, to be kind. Simple, basic stuff. Wow, it really took the pressure off me. Number one, so then I could actually, when the pressure comes off, we tend to show our best self. So I was putting more and more of my best self forward. And second, well, frankly, for the people on the receiving end of that sincere interest, including girls, they liked it a lot. So it was a really smart strategy. It was a win-win strategy. Lowered the pressure on me and sincerely and authentically was being someone that other people like being around.
Yeah, you mentioned the listen first, which reminds me of like the 7 habits of highly effective people that you
Oh,
first seek to understand and then to be understood. So I
very,
liked
very
that
good.
connection too.
Yeah, that's right. And
And
that
as
doesn't mean let other people take advantage of you or push you around. Actually, if you kind of are that person who just enters into a situation in a friendly and generous way, not trying to put themselves above anybody, you become less of a threat to others, and the likelihood of being attacked or harmed actually tends to go down.
Yeah, this is great. It's relating to one of my future questions. But before, I wanted to ask you. So I read that this social anxiety comes from emotional neglect, not feeling confident, threats, overthinking. So it also comes from like the feeling of wanting to be good and being liked by everyone. So where else can this feeling come from?
Well, for one, it can come from real observation of your situation. I mean, classically, if what if you're the only fill in the blank in your school, right? Or what if you're the first fill in the blank in who's president of your class, or later on in life, the first of so and so in the boardroom? It can be it can be genuinely a little spooky. So you have to pay attention. And I want to make a really important distinction here between vigilance and anxiety, or I'll even would say maybe wariness and anxiety. So I have a lot of experience as a rock climber, and I've never done it at the highest level, but I was, pretty serious about it. And you can be in situations, you can imagine other sports or other environments where there are a lot of hazards and you feel confident because you feel like you can take care of the hazards. So there's a place for tracking potential threats without feeling anxious at the same time. This is really important. You can see clearly and you can have your plan for what you're going to do if it happens, right? But you don't need to be all anxious about it. See what I mean? That's really important. And so, even if you are in a situation where there are threats, you don't necessarily have to be anxious, in terms of social threats. Beyond that, I think that a lot of people, they're just really hard on themselves. And you can think about also people in environments that are just really prone to status seeking. Like, I grew up in Los Angeles. I was lower middle class, basically, background. But still, I could see the Hollywood world around me. And boy, there are a few people typically, as socially anxious, often as some of the most charming actors in the world. They'd be the first to tell you that they're really concerned. Plus, there's the brain's negativity bias. You're familiar with that term. It means that we have a brain that's like Velcro for bad experiences, but Teflon for good ones. So because of that biological tendency, there you are with a bunch of friends, right? And, 9 out of 10 events with that friend group this week or this day are all great. But there was one where you walked over to the group of people who were talking with each other, 3 or 4 of your friends, and they didn't move their circle to let you step into it, let's say. Boom, that's the one you're obsessing about for the rest of the day. That's the negativity bias. So that's another reason why we develop social anxiety.
Yeah, I like the phrase you said, negativity bias, always focusing on one thing and your brain like being velcroed to the bad
Yeah,
and tough on the good. I like that analogy.
yeah.
So how does it feel being in a socially anxious state? Like how does it feel psychosomatically, physically, and what might we feel emotionally and mentally? And then do these feelings change from low stake environments to life-changing situations?
These are fantastic questions. So, anxiety is a complex state of being that has cognitive, which means thoughts, has elements that are based on thoughts, feelings, sensations, and desires. Think of those four together. Now, one of them might be more prominent in a moment, like you might start ruminating. Oh, why'd they say that? Why'd they say that? Or you might say something kind of dumb, and for you, then you're obsessing about it for the rest of the day, even though actually everybody else kind of went, what? That's weird. And then they stopped thinking about it 30 seconds later, because good news, bad news, you're not that important to most people. Right? So anyway, so it has these four elements to it. And sometimes like a sensation element might be just sort of like the feeling in the pit of your stomach of dread. Emotionally, it might be a kind of worry or fear. Other negative emotions can come in like hurt, is a major player in social anxiety. Anger, also buried anger sometimes, really important to get at. What's the anger based on mistreatment or thwarted desires? That's really worth naming and trying to speak to. So that can go on. But here's another element here that for a lot of people, they manage their social anxiety by playing small and restricting their world. So they live inside the bars of an invisible cage. And so as long as they're inside the bars of their invisible cage, they don't feel that anxious. As long as they don't reach out to other people, as long as they don't go to big social events, they don't speak up in class, they avoid certain things. They're avoiding. Well, they don't feel that anxious. So key point, even if people are not particularly feeling much social anxiety, they can be very affected by their social anxiety issues because it leads them to function and to experience life in a much smaller, almost even cage than would be really natural for them if they felt freer to take chances and just be themselves out loud more freely.
Yeah, you mentioned that a big part is like staying small and avoiding, which reminded me of the fight, flight, and freeze, like the
Yeah.
three main ways.
Yeah, especially freezing. It's a kind of, you're fleeing from others and then you kind of freeze inside your small container. And so here's a key path outward, and it's a framework I use frequently. So imagine the person who maybe has been mistreated, maybe they've seen others mistreated. For whatever reason, it feels safe for them to be inside the bars of this invisible cage. They're safe inside it, all right? And yet they're suffering inside. They feel like they see other people having fun. They see other people kind of like them, being more confident, relaxed, making mistakes, no big deal, shrugging off their mistakes and still moving on with their lives. And they want to expand the bars of their cage. What can you do? Well, the cage is structured to avoid risking dreaded experiences. So people listening might ask themselves, if you take a bird's eye view of yourself over a typical day, what do you think is reasonable caution, reasonable prudence, fine, and when you take that bird's eye view of your typical day, let's say at high school or afterward, in what ways do you have a sense that you're pulling yourself in? You're not saying everything that's really in your heart to say that could be said. You're not taking certain chances. You're avoiding certain situations. All right. That's your strategy or script for avoiding the risk of a dreaded experience. You're not going to risk that dreaded experience. Okay? What is the dreaded experience? And what do you think the risk is? Now, I'm going to be a little boring and technical here. We build our cage based on three things that might have been true when we were younger, maybe. Number one, the chance of a bad thing happening. If we think it's highly likely that the bad thing will happen, oh yeah, we want to build that fort, call it a fort that we're protecting ourselves behind. The likelihood of the bad event, number one. Number two, what would be the impact of the bad event if it happened? Again, if the impact is severe, we really want to build that fort. If, on the other hand, the impact is trivial, like someone might frown briefly, but then forget about what happened an hour later, then we don't really need to build that fort so much. The impact of the bad event. And then third, how would we cope with the bad event if it happened? Well, if we believe that we are not very good at coping, that we would be defenseless, we would not have any response, we would not be resilient in any way, wow, we really better build high walls and thick ones. On the other hand, if indeed the bad event did happen, and if indeed it was a pretty big bad event, but if we could, handle it, cope with it, get through it, maybe a crummy day, but no lasting effect that really matters, We don't need to hide behind these big, tall, thick walls. Okay? So today, what you can do to help yourself is to really ask yourself, what is the likelihood of the bad event if I ask someone to go to a dance with me? How likely are they to say no or something else, right? Play football in the afternoon. How likely is it really? Second, if it happened, how bad would it feel? Really? It might be annoying for a little while, but how devastating would it be? How much would it be social suicide for the rest of your high school, the next 3 years? Like, how likely, how bad would it be? It probably wouldn't be that bad. And third, even if it did happen and it was kind of bad, how would you cope with it? Well, you might do several things. You might apologize to the person. You might realize that that person's not a real friend. You're going to find more friends elsewhere. You might, learn a lesson, be a little more skillful next time, and just not repeat that social mistake. If you did, in fact, commit a social mistake, you would cope with it. This is a very helpful structure. It's super rational, but it's the kind of thing you can really write down. What is, the event you dread, and what do you dread you would feel? And then ask yourself, how likely is it? How big a deal would it be? And how could you cope with it? And then based on that, take small risks. Pick small things that you dread and push back the bars of your invisible cage one little step. And then see what happens. When it goes well, it almost always goes well. When it goes well, slow down. Recognize the good fact that it's going well. Let yourself feel the good fact that it's going well. And third, take in the good fact. Take in the good feelings related to the good fact to grow the good that lasts inside. This fundamental strategy is incredibly helpful. And you've actually read about it already in my book, Just One Thing, because there's a practice called Risk the Dreaded Experience.
Yes, I liked how you said that the cage is built on three things: chance of a bad thing, impact of the bad event, and how likely we are to cope. And then earlier you had mentioned that this can, like, some symptoms include like staying small and like just not opening up. But this got me to wonder, like, what if it's just like a bad day? Like, normally you're really outgoing at school, normally you just are like you're outgoing and talk with a lot of people. What if it's just a bad day and you're just closed? How will you differentiate that between actual SAD or just like not feeling that day?
Oh, okay, great. SAD is chronic. So by definition, um, we all have bad days. And frankly, being a teenager, and there's a lot of stuff that goes on, just all kinds of stuff. And so, yeah, maybe you have a bad day. No big deal. Um, that's really different from being chronically withdrawn, chronically avoiding important growth opportunities. And even if you can make yourself uh, soldier on behind the mask, a lot of people look all happy and popular, but they're very uneasy. They've clawed their way up the slippery slope, the slippery pole rather, of popularity in high school, and they're really nervous that they might start sliding back down again. So there can be a lot of anxiety, behind a mask. Uh, that's the real question. Is it chronic? And if it is, what can you do about it?
Okay, yes. So I liked you said that it's chronic, so it actually is regular, but this is just a once in a while thing.
Yeah.
So social anxiety is like the feeling that I want everyone to include me. I want to be validated. Everyone should value what I say. So this sounds like the imposter syndrome, where you think that, oh, they're so much better than me, I'm not good, why am I here? So how can we differentiate imposter syndrome and SAD?
Yeah. I'm a little dubious about dropping in the desire for everyone to approve of me as a component of social anxiety. It seems to me to be sort of tacked on almost as an afterthought. And uh, that said, let's just play with it a moment here. So here's a person like me. I sought approval because being approved of was very connected to my self-worth. All right, my self-worth was not unconditional. More and more over time, it's important to establish a sense of your own worth that's innate based on your good heart and your talents and your efforts. Then it's innate. It's not based on results outside of you, which you have some influence over, but there's so many factors that are completely out of your control that determine what is happening around you. But inside yourself, do you have a good heart? Are you making efforts? Is there innate goodness deep down inside you? And are you learning along the way? For me, those are the three most fundamental, really four, I said, bases for innate self-worth. A sense of your own innate goodness. Second, you come from love a lot. You have a good heart. You're kind, not cruel, etc. Third, you make efforts. You know what I mean? You try. You don't always succeed, but you get out and you try. And fourth, you learn along the way. I was about 15 when a huge light bulb went off in me. I was pretty miserable. I felt really helpless and hopeless. And I suddenly realized, based on some things that were happening, that I could not change the past. I could not even change this moment of the present, but I could change my future by learning a little every day, by growing a little, healing a little, getting a little more skillful, understanding other people better, understanding myself better, shifting my thoughts and feelings, start learning how to manage my emotional reactions. I could grow a little every day. And suddenly that was incredibly hopeful because I have the power. We all have the power to learn and heal and grow a little every day. No one can take that from us, but no one can do it for us. So we are responsible for how we use that power to learn and grow every day, and we earn the fruits of our practice. So that's a long way of saying that I think that it's helpful specifically with regard to things like status. We live in a time that's extremely status-oriented, partly because of social media. On our social media feed, we get to see the highlight reels of everybody else's lives. How popular they are, the cool party they went to, what they look like at their very best. And we're painfully aware of our own, real life, warts and all. So we compare a lot. And I think it's really important to help yourself make this shift from what's called extrinsic motivation to intrinsic motivation. There's a place for, if you're applying for a scholarship or a job, or you're running for, student council, there's a place for paying attention to how you're coming across and the allies that you're building over time and the opportunities, you're creating for yourself and the doors you're hoping to walk through later on. There's a place for that, for sure. Absolute place for that. But mostly, it's really useful to value, like I said, do you come into the day with good intentions? Are you kind? Do you try? Do you learn? That's the kind of stuff that's most important as the fundamental source of our sense of worth.
Yes, I liked that part where you said that the four steps to feel that you are actually good, and then spread love and kindness and make efforts and then learn along the way, which
Yeah,
reminded me of the book Just One Thing.
that's
Um,
great.
Now, my next question is one of Andrew Horn's famous quotes is, "The goal is not to be liked by everyone. The goal is to be like ourselves with everyone." How can we change the goal from seeming perfect to everyone else and focus on bringing our true, authentic selves to every conversation and interaction we have?
Great question. It relates to the previous comment question,
Mm.
right? Yeah. First off, where's your attention? Is your attention over there with them and their reactions to you? Or is your attention on what you are authentically feeling and being supportive and even compassionate toward yourself? Is that where your attention is? Over there or in here? And also, if it's in here, your attention can be on, what is really true for me here? What is my really kind of authentic response here or true feeling? rather than generating something that I think will please the audience. Key difference. Attention over there with them or attention in here with you. And one of the things I learned along the way as someone who was initially extremely over there with them and feeling really awkward about it was to start moving toward, okay, speaking for myself. Not to, I mean, with a little bit of skill about how it would be understood or how others might react to it, but mainly speaking my truth. What was I experiencing? What did I care about? What was important for me? What did I see? And I don't mean this to be just dumping our emotions on other people or just saying the first thing that comes into our mouth, giving a little thought to it. But what's the priority over here? Supporting yourself or trying to please the audience? And interestingly, when we shift that focus from trying to please the audience, which has, frankly, certain qualities of manipulation and phoniness in it, and being kind of like a chameleon, depending on who the audience is, when we shift from trying to please the audience into simply more and more being our own natural self, the audience usually likes us even more than ever. So it's a win-win.
hmm You mentioned a lot about where our attention is. Are we trying to please the audience or be ourselves? And it reminded me of the three questions that Andrew Horn says, and he's a communications expert, and he gives three questions to think about when you feel anxiety. So the first one, how do I want to show up? Second, what do I want to know? And lastly, what do I want to share? So this helps you identify it helps us identify our intention. So we're like putting our attention on our intention so that we don't keep questioning why we're doing something. So this is one way that he gives to overcome the anxiety. So how else can we transform anxiety to like communication?
Yeah, I think his advice is excellent. And several things that I think are really useful have to do with the ways in which the body gets anxious. Anxiety involves sensations. And so if you are calming your body, and I'll tell you how in a second, that will bring your anxiety down a lot. Imagine a 0 to 10 scale of anxiety. You know, a 10 is you're running for your life from, I don't know what, Darth Vader or something. And then, 0, no anxiety whatsoever. Well, if you, for example, you can do it with me if you like, or other people can, take a breath or two and make the exhalation twice as long as the inhalation. So it would be like inhaling 2, 3, exhaling 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Do that once and notice how it changes you. Do it 3 times in a row. You will feel really different. So that's because exhaling engages what's called the parasympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system, which is involved with calming. If the fight-flight sympathetic nervous system is involved with that, the parasympathetic nervous system is described as rest and digest because it gets activated when we're chilling and also when we're, comfortable after a meal. Okay, so that's a simple thing you can do. Another very simple thing you can do is if you are breathing, just breathing normally, tune into the internal sensations. The air flowing in through your nose and down your throat or mouth into your lungs and up and out again, your chest rising and falling. That interoception, it's called, engages a part of the brain, technically the insula, I-N-S-U-L-A. There are 2 of them, one on either side, on the inside of the temporal lobes. And when you engage the insula, it acts like a circuit breaker that shuts down activity in the default mode network, which is in the middle rearward part of your cortex. And the default mode network is very involved with anxious rumination, with reviewing the past and worrying about the future, with a very strong sense of self-consciousness. A lot of sense of me, myself, and I in that. Well, right there, you just tune into those internal sensations, see what happens in your state of being after, 20 seconds, maybe a little longer. you'll feel different. Another trick for calming the body is to raise your gaze to the horizon or get a sense of anything as a whole. That too reduces activity in the parts of the brain that get caught up in negative rumination, brings you into the present, and kind of helps you take things less personally. Social anxiety, there's a kind of a funny term in psychology about it, is a form of morbid self-preoccupation, negativistic self-preoccupation. Well, if we're less preoccupied with ourselves, we're going to be less socially anxious. Now, as I've said, one way to become less preoccupied with yourself is also like what Andrew said, in terms of attention on others, with not being so worried about them, and being truly focused on what you most care about yourself. That's healthy preoccupation with yourself. But additionally, what I'm saying about the sense of things as a whole, or a bird's eye view, really helps to disrupt negative self-preoccupation in the brain. And then the last one is get in touch with your heart. Both ways. A sense of others who care about you truly, for real, and be in touch with that. And also a sense of your caring for others. Now, it might help to enact this by texting a friend or just sending someone a compliment or reaching out to someone to say you're kind of lonely and a weird thing happened, you just kind of want to talk through with somebody who likes you. Great, great, great. But you can also do it inside just your mind. You know, bring to mind people who you know care about you, or your cat, or your dog, right? Or your ancestors. They care about you. And also get in touch with your caring for others. Social supplies downregulate anxiety. It's because, again, we go back to being hunter-gatherer bands. You know, we're a pack primate. And when we feel connected by others, it's a natural way to reduce anxiety. And then the last thing I'll say about this as a go-to is to take action. Action binds anxiety. You know, so much anxiety is around a sense of being helpless or powerless. Things happen to us. We lack agency. So take action. It doesn't even have to be related to what you're anxious about. It could be just anything. You know, decide whether to go get a glass of water. You know, have a sense of your own potency, your own agency. But also in particular, you know, do things that help you feel more connected with others. You know, take action. Then you'll be less anxious.
Yeah. So you mentioned a lot of different ones, and they're all connected to this theme of like your physical sensations. So you gave the example of breathing, you inhale and then exhale for twice the amount of time, focusing on your internal sensations, so how your stomach is feeling, where you feel anxious in your body, and then focusing on the people you care about and the people who care about you. So for example, maybe calling them, texting them, or like
Even just
asking, how are
imagining
you?
them. Yeah, even
Yeah,
just
thinking
imagining
about them
them.
too.
Yeah, that's right. Good.
Yeah,
You really are a great listener, by the way.
thank you. In summary, today we talked about a lot. We talked about the differences between just like small anxieties having a bad day and anxiety, which is the main difference being like it's chronicle and just a bad day is just a once in a while. We also talked about like what it is, symptoms like this is it feels like feeling less than others, feels like an empty place in your heart, it feels like we don't belong. And then we also discussed that we need to shift our attention from pleasing others to being our true authentic selves. So my last question for you today is, how can our audience learn more about you and your work?
Oh, that's great. First, let me really say for the record, I've done, I don't know how many hundreds plus interviews. This is truly one of the best. You are really good at this. And one of the important things that relates to what I said about positive neuroplasticity and filling that hole in our hearts is to take in the good that's real. Take it in. It's really important. So I want to thank you, and you're very, very adept here. I also want to acknowledge that I kind of botched your question about the difference between imposter syndrome and social anxiety. And I'll just say briefly that to me, they overlap a lot. The so-called imposter syndrome is a version of social anxiety that some people experience. And also some of the people who have social anxiety also feel like they have to put on a shiny mask every day, that they're always at risk of it being revealed who they really are, and that makes them feel like imposters. So I want to acknowledge that. And then last, just me. They can Google my name, Rick Hanson, Hanson, and I have a website that's full of freely offered resources, many of them relevant to this topic territory. I would add that anybody who wants a scholarship can do my programs for free. And we have a special place in our heart for certain groups of people, young people among them. We technically ask that when the person, signs the basic form to be part of a course, that if they are not yet 18, that they make sure that they have a parent who knows about it too, just to kind of make sure we're respecting that relationship. But in general, we offer our courses for free. And certainly anybody, whether their parents know it or not, can go on our website and take a look at what we offer. The last thing I want to say, if I could, I'm going to veer slightly here. One of the really important ways to reduce the sense of social anxiety is to feel like you are part of something bigger than yourself. The natural world, one of the great refuges for me has been wilderness. It's been a source of deep connection. Social anxiety is about the lack of positive connection. Wilderness for me has been a source. For some people, they find the sense of being part of something larger than themselves by joining with others in common cause as people who care about something. They care about global warming, they care about the whales, they care about cats, they care about something. And so one of the things that I would really encourage and just say, including for young people, is to really become engaged in the political life of your own country. You get to decide what your values are and which way you want to vote eventually and that stuff. Get engaged. We're in this together. In America, for example, we recently had a presidential election, and roughly a third of the people in America who could vote are not registered to vote. And the younger a person is, the more likely it is that they're not registered to vote. So I'm not saying anything about how a person should vote. I am saying something that a way to feel less anxious is to feel that you're experiencing more of what's called civic engagement. You're informed, you're clear about your values, and you're clear about your actions. And you're connecting with other people around all that. And that's one thing that I hope for going forward in the future.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Rick Hanson, for taking your time out today to share your experience and wisdom about this topic. I learned a lot, and I think in the ending part you mentioned that you feel like you're part of something bigger, so not just like a higher power, but also your country.
Yeah.
And I truly enjoyed talking with you today, and I hope our audience did too.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You are listening to Mindful, Beautiful, and Thriving, a podcast series by Tharaka Foundation. As part of our youth series, we will be releasing new episodes every Friday, so make sure to continue to check those out. We hope you enjoyed this podcast, and thank you so much for listening.